talk about the economics of construction. I'll start with, by means of a quick, how will we walk through this? I'll share a little bit about what nPlan does for those of you that haven't heard this already. I'll walk you through a brief synopsis of the economics of construction. If you're really interested in some of the things I'm saying, you can be sure that I'm not the one who said it. Noble Francis and Stephen Grunewald are largely my influencers. They wrote a fascinating book called The Economics of Construction. It sits on my shelf, and I've read it. Yeah, think they make some fascinating points within it that have now since developed, because when they wrote the book, the world was slightly different, not that long ago, but the thesis underneath it. I'm not going to walk you through the entire book. This is not a book review, but I'll touch on it a little bit, and then I'll touch on the role of data, and then I'll finish and color all of this up with a case study, something that's really happened, using the concepts of economics, the concepts of data into real world value. And hopefully that'll give you enough fuel to ask lots of good questions. So what nPlan does is we take these wonderful documents or artifacts known as program files, schedule files, Gantt charts, and we teach a machine learning algorithm, or a machine learning algorithm reads these files to understand what was planned to happen on a construction project, what actually happened to those construction projects, and then using that knowledge, it is capable of generating hyper-realistic forecasts of what is the most probable outcome for a current project. We call this data-derived forecasting. Effectively, if you dig into the beautiful image I have on my screen, this is effectively known as a graph. It is a graph structure that shows the plan of work, and it is done in a fairly constant way for much longer than I've been alive. And that way is to effectively say in advance of time how long you, as the planning function, think or believe a future event will take. So as a simple thing, you could say, I am planning my project today. I think it'll take me, or take the team, 25 days to pour this amount of concrete. And of course, you're going to use data to the best of your knowledge to help you create that estimate. So data traditionally has either come from the experience of individuals that work on these projects. It comes from books. You can buy books that help you with creating estimates. I've forgotten the name of the book. Oh, Spons. That's the one I remember in the UK. There are many others around the world, of course, that do this. But effectively, that's the best you have. So it's a combination of, call it, written experience for production and your own prior experiences and biases, or the biases of your team, which inherently, no construction project is ever as simple as doing one activity. It is a sequence, a very complex sequence of hundreds and thousands and maybe tens of thousands of things that have to be executed for that delivery. And so getting one of, sorry, I changed slides by mistake. Getting one of these things wrong can have a cascading effect on the outcome of the project. And the likelihood that you've got at least one thing wrong is astronomically high. Or put it in different words, the likelihood that you've got all of it correct is astronomically low. So what inevitably will happen is that these plans are built using individual experience, which leads to poor outcomes, just because you weren't capable of planning the whole thing perfectly. There's no such thing as perfection in this space. But the hardest thing, and this is one that I know Martin has a lot of energy for, is that we just can't learn those lessons at scale. So this is where you planned 25 days to do this thing, to pour concrete. You took 40 days to pour it, and the reasons behind that are X, Y, and Z. By the time you've learned that, meaning you've planned and you've executed, and now it's time to do it again on the next project, I don't know, 5 years could have passed between the original plan and the assumption. A lot of time can pass between these events, and of course you have to remember that the events you see will always be singular and highly individual. So there's just no way you can learn from hundreds of thousands of projects simultaneously, right? We can't experience that much information inside our minds, or be present in that many places at once, of course. So what we do at nPlan is we use a machine to go learn all of those plans, what was planned, what was different, and then it helps out with 3 key questions. How long do you think my project might take? What might go wrong with it? And what can I do to capture risk or reduce risk and capture opportunity? So effectively, you've got these 3 chunky questions, which are somewhat, these are very big questions, depending on the size. It doesn't matter how big your project is. I'm sure these are very strategic questions that not just folks that work in project controls or in the planning function, but many different parts of the project will need to know these answers. And we help give those answers in an unbiased way. There are, of course, methods that have been put in practice over many years now. The one I like, I don't like it. The one that is somewhat funny to use is, of course, the do nothing method, which is where you have a plan and no one looks at it. You just have a plan and then you go build. So there's no assessment of what is the likelihood that we might achieve this plan, or what are the risks involved in the plan. That's, of course, the fastest thing anyone can do, but you probably don't get very good outcomes on projects that simply take no view. Then there's the traditional method of quantitative schedule risk analysis, is very commonly known and used on major infrastructure projects and energy projects around the world, and some commercial building projects also use this method, which largely relies on the project team to create inputs, build a model, and produce outputs. That takes time, of course. You have to go through workshops. You cannot instantaneously spit out what a forecast might look like. And then there's nPlan's approach, which is entirely objective and data-driven, and thankfully doesn't take weeks and months to run. It's a matter of hours before you know a potential outcome for your project and what you should do about it. We will talk a lot more about data, of course, but this data, and it's not, nPlan didn't generate this data. It's come from the largest owner-operators and contractors in the world. These are a few of them that work with us today, and I'm honored to call them our customers. And it's their schedule data and legacy of schedule data that our engine has read to create its capability today. A couple of visuals to help you see that it is a product, and it is a thing that that people use. It's effectively a web application where the schedule's gone in, the forecast is created. Above is a target forecast, which basically says probabilistically this is how your project might turn out. We can also spot if there are any quality problems inside the program or schedule file that might impede or hamper the quality of the forecast. And then, of course, start going further into detail where we can explore at individual what things are really contributing to the outcome of the project at an activity or a milestone level. And then when it starts getting fun is because, again, this is a machine and it doesn't really get bored of doing analysis. It can start comparing version to version or revision to revision. You can see, have I gotten better or worse between January and February? And you can answer that question, or you could do a what if scenario. So if you're comparing 2 different schedules and say, what if I built this or what if I built that? Which one is riskier? And the engine can help produce a quantitative answer to all of those good questions. This is a part that I'm very embarrassed about talking, because there's a photograph of my face on the slide, and I'm also talking to you with my video on, which is weird for me. but Martin said that I should say this. And nPlan, earlier this year, we announced a funding announcement, and we had some of the major press around the country, not just in the UK but internationally, cover us as we've grown. So we attracted $18.5 million in capital funding from GV, which is part of Alphabet. I'll move the slide. So Alphabet, as everyone knows, is the parent company of Google, and the parent company of Google made an equity investment into nPlan. So I now have a member of GV or Alphabet that sits on the board of nPlan, and I can say it has been an absolute pleasure to have, call it, and someone. His name is Tom Hume. He works with GV, but he also comes with the background from Alphabet, and so that gives, you could call it, a really fresh perspective on what it means to build a truly valuable company for the world we live in, and that helped us. I mean, we sort of knew our vision from when Alan and I, this is Alan, the other guy in the photograph, when Alan and I started the company, which is we wanted to build a company that unlocked the world, we wanted to build a world that is no longer limited by its appetite in risk. So if you think about it, there are countless engineering and construction or infrastructure projects, and I use the term infrastructure broadly to consider things that we as humanity require to function. There are countless projects that are simply not happening today because we as mankind perceive the risk of that execution to be beyond our capability. And we think that mankind is missing out because of that perception. And we want nPlan to become that mechanism that creates confidence and certainty into the quantity of risk that is being taken. And if you know what you're doing, you know the amount of risk in front of you, you're capable of making better decisions and more confident decisions. And all of that underlying tone is or thread is what I'll continue to share in as the slides go on. Okay, I'll skip this one, but it's or do it quickly. It's basically, this is a system that relies on schedule files that is often, at least we've seen with most of our clients, use Oracle's scheduling system, P6, but we're agnostic to that. You could schedule wherever you want, really. And those files come into the nPlan system, the analysis is done, the actions go back out, and more files come in, and the wonderful circle of analysis and action kick off. Okay, on to my introduction towards the world of economics. And feel free to ask questions. Maybe we'll do them afterwards, I suppose, about anything you've heard so far. But I'll start with a statement, and that is, negotiating purely on price to drive down cost on a bid creates a fallacy of value that is not only misleading, but is also detrimental to the sustainability of this industry. And then some facts. In 2018, and I'm fairly sure this statistic is currently valid as well, given the anecdotal information I have, almost 2/3 of businesses that won public sector awards felt that they were awarded purely on the basis of the lowest cost, despite people actively trying to avoid that. So the reason I feel so, and I'll explain in the following slides why I'm so passionate about this subject, that if you think that you've got the best deal by giving the cheapest contractor the contract, you've not got anything. You're completely misguided about whether or not that is actually going to lead you to a successful outcome. And allow me to explain why. And this is the crux of the challenge of creating economic value through construction at scale and sustainably. Cool. Okay, so a couple of interesting things about the construction industry. This is, again, from another CBI report about the rates of insolvencies per 10,000 firms in the sector. What I would say is that this is not yet normalized for the amount of gross value being added into the economy, or the loss of gross value being added into the economy. So yes, lots of hospitality is the top of the thing, which means like you're sort of saying lots of restaurants go out of business every year, which is true. My local chippy sadly collapsed during COVID, which has made me very sad. But the amount of gross value being generated by that chippy, I shouldn't use that as an example because it's very morbid, is fundamentally very different to what's happening in the construction sector. So effectively, there are just a lot of construction companies going broke, is the way you can take that. Of course, the one we all know about is Carillion, but supply chains in this industry are regularly falling apart as various layers start breaking. So unlike my local chippy, where because sadly he went out of business, does not mean that there is an entire vertical chain that is also breaking apart with it, other than my diet. Whereas in the construction industry, that's not quite the same. You have an owner, you have a contractor, you have a subcontractor, you have subcontractors of that. And any breaks in those supply chains start creating knock-on effects around the productivity loss inside the sector, which gets exacerbated. And I have not yet found enough research that shows how that image, how the sort of scale of insolvencies in this construction sector impact gross value added. But needless to say, things are pretty bleak out there. There's plenty of, I think the current margin estimate that we have for 2020, 2021 is not yet released, is still minus 0.1%, right? And that's the average. Right, but inside all of this, we have effectively a challenge on our hands where we're talking about an industry that has incredibly low margins, that is, and mind hitting you, please. Effectively, you have two things that you need to hear from this, right? One, we have very low margins in the industry, and two, we have a basis of contracting that is fundamentally wrong. But what does it mean to create contract? In my simplistic definition, a contract is a mechanism, and this is not, please don't consider this the academic definition. But what does it mean to contract? It means to create a transfer. It means to create a quantification and transfer of risk from one party to the other for the execution and delivery of goods and services. That basically, in simpler words, means that someone with money says, I want a building, and so I'm going to transfer this responsibility and the risk of that responsibility to another party, and that would be, in construction, the contractor. But of course, the key thing that I'm doing in that state is I'm trying to create a transfer of risk. I'm saying that I need you to do something for me. But at the end of the day, I need something. I need my building, right? Or I need my power plant. And I'm passing an element of risk onto the contractor to get that to happen. Now, if I don't know how much risk I have transferred, or the contractor doesn't know how much risk they have absorbed, then we have effectively a broken contract. And come on. Oh, here we go. Again, in the non-academic way, the way I see this is that you effectively start, if you start at number one, and you're trying to award this contract, where you have very little to no differentiators to create the award, meaning if you look at a pool of 10 different contractors, who is really the better one is quite a difficult answer to pull out. Is it true that each contractor is truly differentiated from one and another? And in the construction industry, it is literally proven that the answer is no. In general, yes, there are some contractors that have better use of technology, and there are some contractors that have a better track record in building something of this complexity, and some contractors use the FMA. I'm not trying to like paint an image that the whole industry is uniform, but in comparative terms, it is very difficult to create significant differentiators between two contractors. I know this because I have been on the owner side issuing contracts, and I won't lie, it was kind of hard to figure out which one is really the better one. And let's just say relationships help, but that's probably not the best way of creating efficiency, creating elasticity inside a decision process. So what often happens to create that difference is a contractor will differentiate by bidding low to demonstrate value, right? So say, look, I'm cheap, I'll still get the job done, but I'm just cheaper than everyone else. And that usually becomes an undisputable force. Like, it's like, well, I mean, they're doing it for cheaper than everyone else, so sure, give the contract to them. Now, given that there isn't a very strong calculation of risk or understanding of how much risk is being taken in that case, adjustments begin during the execution of the contract. And needless to say, that original bid price is no longer valid. And the adjustment process is an extremely risky play to run at. No one, I believe, has a true mechanism to estimate the success of these adjustments. Maybe you might adjust your way into profitability. Maybe you won't. It's a bit of a roll the dice and hope for the best. Which, of course, for the original procurer has led to poor outcomes and a weak reputation, right? They don't feel like they got the thing that they signed up for, irrespective of whose fault that might look like. And so this becomes what I would call the broken trust equation. And that is trust equals reliability, credibility, reliability, and intimacy divided by self-orientation. I'm not going to go into a big mathematics thing about like what this means, but I want to focus your eye on just two parts of this equation, which is credibility and reliability. I'll briefly explain what intimacy means. That basically means that you feel well, intimacy and self-orientation are largely down to like you could call it the relationship and your aversion to or it's not aversion, but your perception of how likely you are to succeed in an interaction. But credibility and reliability are two huge pieces of this puzzle, and especially when you come to commercial contracting, that really shine through. And so I'll talk I'm continuing to build on how the broken model of contracting is effectively creating a broken trust equation, which is largely driven by these two factors, which one is called credibility, which means you have the track record to show that you are capable of executing on something and doing something, and that you are consistently capable of doing something. And of course, this is where the Q point comes in for data, right? Now, when I needed to put together, when I was choosing the case study to present today, I did have to think like, well, how much time do I have? And that's always definitely going to be limited. I have less than 15 minutes to talk. And I would say the case study I'm about to present is a case study with a contractor. there are just as many case studies or examples where this has happened from the owner level. So you can either ask a question or try and imagine or as I explain, I'll try and present this as on both sides of the equation rather than just the contractor side of the equation, because it's really important that both sides of the contracting of the contract really believe there's an improvement in the trust equation. Okay, so really quickly, Kia is as many of you might know, and maybe there's a few people from Kia on the call today, is I believe is Britain's largest contractor. I might be wrong about that fact. I'm sorry if I am, but they're a very, very large tier 1 contractor in the UK. And there was a bidding opportunity that had appeared with Thames Water in the Guildford area, about £80 million for this scope of work. And of course, Kia, amongst others, were planning to submit a bid for this scope. And it was very clear from the very onset that the client, which is Thames Water, wanted their supply chain to color up a view of what risks you could call it, take a more mature view of risk and come forward with innovative ideas as to how they might execute the project that might create that differential. Again, remember that challenge of where the differentials really sit between contractors. So the really hard thing about this scope of work was, how do you really know what's going to happen? There was an expectation from the client that you should be able to deliver this project under these guide rails, and if those expectations were not correct, then there had to be a feedback loop of improvement, right? Say, hey, you think it's going to take 25 months to do this, but actually the correct assumption, your assumptions are incorrect because of these reasons. And this is where, like, overall the problem that we're going up against is that 3 out of 145 projects sort of met expectation, which means they were fundamentally, the expectation of what should be delivered was completely off kilter. Yes, that is a US dollar sign on there because the statistic we have found here came from the United States, but I think it's all applicable, largely down to this optimism bias that was introduced. So when we started this piece of work, we had, we certainly had sufficient executive sponsorship to make sure that as we go head to head with these biases, that not only the bidding team, but also, well, the entire bidding team felt as though this was not an attack, that we're not attacking any biases, but we are creating a system to put up the mirror and say, in an objective way, here's what the data is telling us. If we really believe we're better than the statistical norm, that's good, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we then have to come with evidence that would allow us to say why we're going to be better than the statistical norm. Sorry, tongue twister. So when the client, when Kia were talking through what they wanted to do, they effectively were looking for a form of validation that would give them credibility in front of the client, in summary form. So what I recognize these slides have become a lot denser. There's just a lot that happened, I guess, and I wasn't very good at summarizing my slides. But I guess verbally, the way I could summarize this is that the collaborative work that was done to sort of identify risks and opportunities meant that not only was the bidding team capable of understanding where their biases sat, but also where they had simply overlooked something. So there was this, I remember these exercises because I was able to at least be a fly on the wall. There's a Venn diagram of human opinion, which is when if you believe something, like the team might have had a belief that the equipment or heavy equipment installation on this project would be very, very risky. And they say, oh my God, we're going to have to put lots of contingencies and mitigation plans in place in case one of our suppliers, gets delayed. And that's a really big risk, and we better make sure we're on it. And then the nPlan forecasts and results are created. If there is a difference between these things, so there'll be two camps. The Venn diagram will have two camps. There'll be camp one, which is confirmation. So potentially the nPlan forecast will say there's a big risk inside equipment installation. There's a big risk inside equipment installation, and the team will feel, yeah, I agree. Thank you for confirming that. And then the second one, which is a much harder one, is what happens in the event that is when nPlan starts saying something that has not been previously considered. So let's say nPlan says that digging a trench around the site is going to be a very risky thing. This is not actually true, by the way. Then the first reaction that'll come through is, no, that's not right. I know what's risky, and that's the things that are already inside my mind, and so therefore that's the thing that's risky. And so there is a difficult journey to go on, and I would not say this worked first time perfectly, but with time, that second part of that Venn diagram is where real value starts getting created. When the team is able to accept the use of data to challenge their biases and then use that to communicate to the client as, look, we have a holistic understanding of what will be required to execute on this project based on a sound amount of information from hundreds of thousands of other projects. So in total, I mean, of course, there's lots of different parts to the project, but in total, I guess there were 70 key activities that got flagged, and it was 200 in total. This is not reducing the project by 233 days, but it allowed the project team to shave off 233 days in total across the project, so including non-critical path activities for my friends in planning here, and a tremendous cost saving as well that came part and parcel with, you could call it, incredibly early mitigation exercises. Of course, the earlier you find out about something, of course, the cheaper it is to mitigate or capture. So my last slide before we jump into your questions. So as you know, as a result, in less than 4 weeks, the team were capable of working through this. But linking back to what I was talking about earlier about the trust equation, about reliability and credibility. Remember the things that were in the circle. If you dissect what happened inside these 4 weeks, what happened was that Kia were able to demonstrate that not only do they have credibility, and they used, I would say, they would use data from past projects to demonstrate they have credibility to execute on this project, and that past data showed with what reliability they would be capable of executing on it in a way that was open and transparent. There is no other way, actually, of truly demonstrating credibility and reliability. And bullshit is not an answer, or smooth talking, if you want to be less obtuse. So being transparent about, hey, look, we know that digging a trench is extremely risky, and we're telling you this because we have the data that shows that to be true. That act, the act of transparently communicating what risks exist on the project, created a sense of not only comfort that the contractor actually knew what they were doing, but also created a sense that fostered intimacy and therefore created a much more conducive working environment, and allowed the broken cycle of procurement to become much more focused on outcomes rather than inputs. Inputs being who is the cheapest contractor in the network, or who's the cheapest contractor on a piece of paper. So overall, I would say, if I bring this back and conclude it, I would say the effects the effects we've seen on not just one project. I know I only showed you one project today. Is that the data creates data is the truth. You cannot dispute that. The truth creates underpins the mechanism we all need to create credibility and reliability, which dramatically improves the trust equation, which dramatically improves the mechanism upon which we can contract, which dramatically improves the economics of construction. I hope the logic I've presented to you today makes sense. I don't mind if you disagree with me. In fact, I'd love for anyone to question my logic. It'll help me become stronger in my argument. But yeah, I really would love to open up to questions.
Okay, superb. Thank you, Dev. So what I'd like to do is a bit of a conversation for about sort of 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to everybody, if that's all right. So I can see some questions in the chat as well. So we'll invite you to come off chat in a bit, but let's just get a conversation going, a bit of a podcasty type thing. So in terms of your approach, Dev, it looks really great, but if you've got a contractor and an immature client, right? So if a client is still looking for the lowest price and a contractor is bidding with their intrinsic bias, and you're working with Kia on a more realistic schedule, which is perceived to be bloated compared to the other schedule, what do you do about getting around that? So is that an education of the client, an education of the system?
Yeah.
What do you have to do to get around it?
Yeah, great question. And a situation we've found ourselves in more than once, sadly, but it's the reality, I guess. We will take the role of, you could call it the challenger. So as nPlan, we will ask, if we're working for a contractor at that stage, contractor, would you like us to, explain to your client what method this is? That can go in one of two ways. The client is either like, wonderful, love it, I'd love to see this outcome, good outcome, or they'll say, this is garbage, I'm not interested. I procure on the cheapest price, and that's what my procurement manager told me to do. That's what my procurement director told me to do. So thanks, but yeah. And in that second mode, what effectively happens is the contractor so at that point, our insights do not get shared with the client. They become the contractor's own insights for their own books. So effectively, you'll end up with two different things. You'll end up with the sad, here's the low price you asked for, Mr. Low price contracting owner. And here's the other price that we now need to know we are probably going to head towards anyway, right? Remember when I said there was claims adjustment processes, knowing how much you need to claim upwards to also becomes an advantage for the contractor. So that basically, in my opinion, that's a bit of a suboptimal outcome, but it's still better than, I have no idea, I'm just going to bid low and hope for the best and pray to God I turn a profit.
Do you see the clients starting to get more educated in this? Are they starting to move? or
Oh,
are you still?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was. This was one of those like battles where I was like, should I start from the client side or should I start from the contractor side? So if I did the client case study, then you'd have asked, oh, the contractors move in. But yes, it's a dual-sided equation, and yes, you have wonderful clients in the UK that do this, but not just the UK, it's around the world that think this way.
Cool. Okay, that's brilliant. So it's COP26 at the moment, Dev. What do you think the contribution is of nPlan and project data analytics to this net zero agenda? And what do you need to do in terms of building out your data models? So there's loads of other characteristics like carbon in there. So where do you think it's going to end up, and what do you think we can do as a community?
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you asked. So I'll start with nPlan and then I'll extend it beyond that. So with nPlan, we've made the commitment that we will be a net zero business next year, not 2030. I originally said on LinkedIn that we're going to do it by 2030, and then I was reminded very quickly that 2030 is actually a very long way away, and why not do it sooner? So we were like, okay, what's sooner than that? How about next year? Yeah, crack on. Now, we do today, I'm not proud of it, but we do emit quite a lot of carbon as nPlan. And the way that is currently happening, the large lion's share of that carbon comes from computation. And this is where data analytics plays in as well, of course, right? To do analytics, you need some form of computation. And yes, the amount of computation is varied. So producing a Power BI dashboard, for example, is not heavy computation. So you're probably in the green light if that's where you are. But sadly for nPlan, we use heavy use of machine learning, and our machine learning models are becoming incredibly more or increasing in complexity as we get more and more data, which is one of those things where like we celebrate as we get more data, but it becomes more complex and more expensive and more carbon intensive to run. So for us, the you could call it our silver bullet is to effectively only do computation on centers that effectively are running on green energy. And there are ways that you can do that. You can you can make, just like if, when you pick electricity providers for your own house, I think most UK houses you can pick if you want renewable only to your supplier. So we can actually do that for our computation as well. But there is a bit of a broader agenda inside all of this, which is while I don't think it's realistic for nPlan to go down any pathways of call it forecasting carbon, right? We are in the forecasting time business. I believe there's a very strong correlation between time and carbon. And put it this way, if you drove from point A to point B and you took the most awful route you could think of through all the traffic lights and starts and stops and got to your point B, you will have emitted more carbon, right? Than if you took an efficient drive at 50 miles an hour with no traffic lights route, right? That mechanism of like being able to understand efficiency of execution and the relationship of efficiency of execution with carbon is extremely synonymous. So I think like with the technology we have today can really help drive efficient work fronts.
Yeah.
Which more efficient work fronts are less carbon emitting work fronts, generally speaking. Not always true, but generally speaking. So to capture both points, like basically, I think we as a community can make very aggressive commitments. Like there's nothing really stopping making these commitments pretty quickly. And it's actually incredibly accessible in the tech industry to go carbon neutral. Like maybe letting the secrets out, but these are not secrets. These are the things that we should share, right? Choosing data centers for where you want your computation to be done to be carbon neutral data centers is as simple as like clicking a simple platform, deciding on a drop-down screen, hitting done, and you're out in like 15 minutes.
Yeah, brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah. So in terms of things like net zero, it's not just about, you know, carbon and concrete, it's about the waste as well. So what you're saying is in terms of machine learning, it's about driving waste out of the system and some of the 7 or 8 leading wastes, which we can start to get sort of under the hood of. And I think that's what you're proposing, isn't it? Basically, it's not
totally. Yes.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, brilliant. There's something else you mentioned was about the consistent reliability of delivery performance. All right. So as part of your trust algorithm, you said about reliability. Can you see a system in the future, and it might be sort of arbitrated by nPlan or the Construction Data Trust or something like that, where you keep stats figures for the clients on every single company's performance? Can you see a future where that's going to happen?
Yeah, like a ratings agency of sorts. Yes.
So it's part of your trust calculation, right? So if you've got the data and it's embedded in your data set, but you're not necessarily reflecting that back to the client to say, these contractors are consistent in terms of the performance. If that starts to come out, you know, there's obviously swings and roundabouts. Do you see that a future where we're going to end up?
I do very much see that. So but it will come in a very, it can only work if it's executed with the mindset that this should be done to improve the trust equation. So yep. You can, I don't want to spell it out, but like you could easily see how that could be used in nefarious ways, right?
Yeah.
And I just don't think it'll ever be sustainable if it were done that way, because crucially, and I'm surprised no one asked this question already, but I'm sure someone's already thinking it. Or maybe it is in the questions and I haven't seen it in the chat yet. But crucially, nPlan does not own the data that it processes. We don't. We never will, and we have no intention to go buy it. It's our client's data. So while it's not explicitly ever written in our contracts, it is explicitly written in the contract that we're not allowed to share that data with anyone else. That's fine, right? Because it's not our data, it's the client's data. They've decided to give it to us as a custodian to process. But what is still expected of that is that the data that has been processed will not be used for anything nefarious to the original holder or the original owner. And so we've been given the custody of this data to process it so that we create value for the owner of that data, right? Otherwise, why would they ever share it if they didn't get value out of it? But yes, do I see a world that we will move towards this as more and more project data starts coming forward and starts creating, call it a playing field that allows each player to play to their strengths? Then yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So I've got 2 more questions and then I'll open up the floor. So in terms of data quality, you must see all sorts of, right, from complete rubbish up to some fairly detailed and well-constructed schedules. So what you're finding in the industry at the moment, so in terms of those organizations that's really pushing the boundaries and are really getting a lot of value from their data, what's your advice to those who's not quite there yet? Now, what you're finding with data quality, and what feedback would you give to the industry about data quality?
What feedback would I give? So I'm going to give you conflicting feedback or conflicting opinions, but I believe both can exist in harmony just as well as they might conflict with one another. One is, you may not need to worry as hard as you are currently worrying about data quality in the future or today. And I'll tell you the second, and then I'll explain what I mean by the first. Sorry. And the second point is that investing in your data quality is never a bad idea, but doing it in a way that, don't just invest carte blanche. Most people don't have that much money to do that, but when you're investing, you should think about the business purpose you want to achieve, right? So if you as a business want to become carbon neutral and you're a construction business, probably worth investing in making sure you're gathering good quality carbon data, right? Now, the reason those are conflicting is because I said, don't worry about quality, and then I said, invest in quality, right? The reason I said the first one, which is probably perhaps the more surprising one to say, is because of nPlan's journey. When we started, it's not like any client has ever given us a beautiful library of P6 data. I mean, it just doesn't exist on the planet. It's nowhere to be found, will never be found. And so to imagine that this might one day happen would just be a waste of time, actually. And many clients, especially in our early days, would say, could you give us recommendations on how we could improve our data quality? I was like, I can, but what's the point? Like, the thing works. Like, technology is capable today of auto cleaning, of creating automatic understanding through imperfect information. Like, this is all known technology to us today. Like, I mean, in 3 years' time, this stuff is going to be like boring and obsolete, right? And who knows what we'll be able to do then? We might be able to create synthetic information, synthetic data from then. So yeah, yeah, I hope that answers it in a weird way.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Yeah. And final question. So it's quite a long question, right? So some people see this as a new set of tools, right? You go to nPlan, you get a new Wizzy tool and you plug it in. Others see it as a job of the data team, right? So you get this new team of people, all the geeks in the corner, you go and give it to the data team and they go and sort it out. And others see it as a transformation of P3M roles, is that people need to think differently through data.
Yeah.
Where are you on that spectrum, and where do you think project professionals will be in about 2025? You know, what do we need to get ready for?
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe we're all preaching to the choir, Martin, but we need to get ready for the advanced use of data. Too easy of an answer. But let me be more specific, because your question warrants it. So, the role of portfolio and project management is changing and will change at an accelerated pace, and it will change in its function around the topic of analysis versus action. So what is largely present today, I would say, is that we have the project controls function is filled with people that spend countless hours in analysis. And the poor soul, you know, they often are creating their own spreadsheets to do their own custom thing, and they would have spent 2 weeks creating the thing, half a week getting or less than half a week getting the outputs of it, and then the remaining slither of time left in their calendar goes into the actions that are then coming out of it, right? So you're basically, people are just not great analysts. I would start by saying that, right? Machines are fantastic analysts. So where data people can play the role, which is the second group you talked about, is they can play the role at creating these infrastructure systems that are required to do this kind of analysis, right? Where it doesn't already exist. And then the project controls profession starts becoming the profession of, now I've got information at my hands that, you know, was a pain to create before, but now I have it. What am I going to do with it? Who am I going to communicate this to? What action is going to come out of that communication? And create the human layer then, right? So just because you have lots of information doesn't mean you know anything else doesn't mean you have any more knowledge about your project. Just like with nPlan, when nPlan says this is a risk, that's not very, that in itself doesn't do anything. What then has to happen is someone in the project controls function thinks, okay, that's a risk. What might be causing it? What might we do about it? That's, you know, requires some good old brain cells. Have a little chat with a couple of people on the project. What do we do about it, right? And I see the function moving more into that area, and the data teams becoming infrastructure providers to enable that to happen.
Cool. Good. Yeah. It's about unlocking these superpowers of project controls so they can start to see into the future, these see round corners, etc. And I think those days are coming, right? And for some people, I think they're already here. And it's a lot better job, right? It's a much more fun job.
I was looking at I obviously will not name the project, but I was looking at a major project in the UK that we're working on. And, out of curiosity, I asked, hey, would you mind sharing your reports with us? The reports that go up to your project director and the CEO and all of that. I just love to see what you guys talk about when you send me. And for the space we work in, which is obviously time and scheduling, the entire report was about what has already happened.
Yeah.
I was like, I mean, is that really fun for you to create? Do you really think you're adding that much value in talking about the present or the past? And why can't you talk about the future, right? Like what's going to happen and what we should do about the things that haven't yet happened. Anyway, and most of that was like, well, just we can't, so we don't.
Yeah, cool. Right, so let's whiz through some of these questions, and then please don't post any more questions, so you come off mute and have a conversation with Deb. But let's just motor through these. So 705, we got one from Facundo about you mentioned P6 schedules, but what about other files, risk registers, change logs? So are you processing those to feed your models?
No, we only process the schedule file, and from the schedule file, the machine learning algorithm can infer what risks exist.
And have you got any plans to expand that in due course, or is that your niche?
For now, that's our niche. Will we expand? Yes. When? I don't know myself yet, but soon enough.
Yeah, cool. A question from Warren at 1917. So is the data set used from the contractor the same as that from the employer? If not, what does that reflect in the context of trust in the data predicted outcomes?
If it's the same project, then I would say greater than 98% of the time the answer is yes. Well, if it's not the same project, then of course no. But then it doesn't matter, I guess. But I mean, we've compared owners versus contractors. Really speaking, an owner schedule is nothing, right? Like it's just a depiction of what the contractor told them, which eventually the thing will be true. Like, did you get the thing done or not? Yes, you might have like some fraudulent stuff in between, but for the most part, I would say like overwhelming majority, this is not a problem. I think this is one of those things where you've heard anecdotal information of this side versus that side being different, and yes, that exists, but we don't live in a perfect world.
Yeah. So in terms of those schedules as well, Dev, do you see that in terms of the client schedule, it's probably very top level and not that much detail in it. If you get to a main contractor, it's got more detail in it. But if you are doing it end to end, and there are some main contractors that do the lot, they've got a lot richer data because they've got all the subbies in there because they're part of their organization. GRL maybe is somebody like that.
Yeah.
So are they going to win ultimately in this data competition? When they're feeding stuff into nPlan, are they going to win compared to the main contractor who's just got the main contractor data and not necessarily all the subby data that's underpinning it? What's your view on that?
Yeah, good. Probably the obvious one, which is that if you have and collect the most information, you will get the most confident models being created for your organization. Where you just don't have that much information and data, then kind of hard to figure out what's going to happen there.
Yeah. So it might start to drive the industry into some of these verticals as well then, which is cool. Yeah, cool. Next one is from Mustafa, 1925. He said, hi, Dev. So does the model not consider the specific capabilities of each contractor and assumes they are all the same?
It very much does consider the specific capabilities of each contractor.
Right, cool. Thank you. And from Stephen as well at 1929, have you got that one?
Yeah, is there a path on how the data will benefit the procurement of materials and consumables for the contractor in construction? I suppose like procurement is an element of the entire execution of a project. If that element is risky, then it'll tell you what amount of risk sits there. And of course, if there's lots of detail to the procurement exercises, then it'll keep splitting up and tell you exactly where, right? So yeah, yes.
Okay, cool. So do you segment COVID and things like that? Or if you've got massive supply chain problems when you're coming out of COVID, do you segment that in your data set? So you weight it because that situation may not be the same in 12
The
months' time.
algorithms will automatically segment. So those are system risks.
Yeah.
Brexit is another classic system risk. So system risk affects not everything, but like, a large chunk, right? And it also contains very long tails, which gets distributed across lots of different activities.
Cool. Great. And Yasha's question. Do you only give clients information on which schedule items have a high level of risk, or do you also let them know which specific risk events could occur?
We do not tell them which events could occur. We tell them what could get affected by risk, and then our clients put their thinking hats on and think what might cause that or what might we do about that.
Cool. Great. Thank you. And one from James Garner. So for public sector clients, your platform entirely supports the recommendation in the construction playbook.
Yeah, we do.
So are you getting any buy-in from public sector clients in this regard?
Yes, we do. Yes, for probably the largest part, it's public sector clients, and I see that continually increasing.
Cool. So they're moving towards reference class forecasting, whereas yours is a different version of reference class forecasting.
It's just a very different approach used at different phases of the project. So actually, spoiler alert, that there's an article coming out in the APM magazine that Alex Budzier from Oxford Global Projects and I are writing. So we're co-authoring an article around reference class forecasting and call it data-derived forecasting, and how the two worlds live in harmony. We're not
right.
In fact, we're collaborating on a project, so like we're definitely not competitive.
Right, cool. Well, that sounds great. I look forward to that. Brian Moon's question. So I assume that the data used in the analytics from contractors will be based on their historic bias. Can you factor it out?
It actually doesn't contain historic bias because there's no such thing as bias when it includes an outcome. So sure, you plan something, but then you have what actually happened. And the difference between those two things is, yes, I guess so you could call that bias in some definition. But are we trying to factor that out? No, not at all. That's learning, right? We're trying to learn how they used to plan that, and then this is what actually happened.
All right, cool. Thank you. And Warren's question, I think that's a statement actually. Alexandra Spencer's question: do you retrain the model?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Joe Quinn's quite a long one. If you were working with a client on, say, a highways project and a P6 schedule had a delay reported on an activity named roadworks, how does the nPlan machine differentiate?
Yeah, you're right. Paint and paint is not the same paint, even if it's on the same project. This is the heart of our patent, actually, Joseph, which is the ability of a machine learning algorithm to autonomously and with no human supervision create context of an individual activity based on the environment of that activity and the structure of the program that it's in. So the graph structure that it lives in. So this is literally if you want to ask what's the kernel of nPlan, it's this: the ability to autonomously know that paint is not the same as paint. If you think paint the door is not the same as paint the garden shed, right? And both have different risk profiles.
Right, cool. Thank you. Our final question is from Humayun. Can we produce a plan or program using nPlan incorporating the mitigation proposed by the nPlan analysis?
Can we produce a plan? Sorry, I'm struggling to answer a little bit because the word produce threw me off. I would say you can heavily edit a plan that incorporates mitigation proposed by the nPlan analysis, but like I would be surprised if someone took it and just completely started again. If as a basic thing, when nPlan goes into its forecasting, yes, we can forecast on nearly every single activity in the project. Most things, though, are not forecasted to go dreadfully wrong. They're sort of like, it'll just be fine, right? So therefore, it's sort of like, you wouldn't want to throw the whole, throw the baby out of the bathtub just because like a couple of bubbles are going fizzy, right? You just kind of scoop out the things that you don't need and start again.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So we've got 5 more minutes. If anybody wants to come off mute and ask Dev a question, please do so. We've got 5 minutes left.
Hi, Dev. It's Kuldeep here from Project Planning.
Hello.
Hi. It's very interesting what you're doing. I'm trying to do something without nPlan, Excel sheets that we all use and stuff. But do you have an example where you've got you've done something for a client, you've predicted an outcome, a planned completion date, and have you followed it all the way through to fruition? So you can say, okay, guys, this time we said in the yeah. Do you have? Is that possible? Something you can share, or how far were you from the that?
Yeah, Kuldeep. If you go to our website and click on case studies, you can we'll happily email you the case studies of that. We did that using what's called redacted backtests. So nPlan as a company just hasn't been around that long. Construction projects take a long time to get done. So what we did was, for a project we've never seen before, we pretended as though we were there on the bid day. So we looked at the bid program, put it through our system, looked at the results, and the as-builts were there. I mean, we couldn't see them. The other team on the other side of the fence were looking at the as-builts, and they were like, how do the two things compare? And we have those case studies on our website.
Okay, and just another one is that I'm guessing when you do the historical data, is there a certain sample size that you require? And does the algorithm, is it, I mean, I don't know whether you guys probably do, standard normal distribution, then you try and find out if the data is non-normalized data, and then do some Monte Carlo analysis as well. I don't know. Is that all done by nPlan, the software?
Yes. To the data question you asked, we typically, the minimum amount of schedule files we need from a client would be 100, but it would have to be 100 very high quality programs with actualized information in it. But on average, we receive 1,900 files per client.
Okay. Okay, yeah. I'll let the people ask questions. I've got so many questions, but yeah.
Okay, thanks, Kuldeep. Warren, please come off mute. You there, Warren?
Yeah, hi, Dev. Always good to see you. Always enjoy your talks, and thanks for facilitating as always, Martin. So I just wanted to pick up on your observation about 2025, and data is here, and we need to be ready for it. I have no doubt about that. I think the doubt that I have is whether commercially we're actually ready to be operating in that data-rich environment. I think you and I have exchanged words in the past where I think we've found some common ground in our frustrations as to the trust being replaced by contracts. I just wonder if you are of any different or more advanced view now on the role of other controls beyond the contract in managing complex projects when you're using data as the leading edge of decision making.
Money.
Question.
Money.
That's I mean much richer than contracting. So it's not a big secret that nPlan has been working on an insurance product around the outcomes of construction projects underpinned by data, which, you know, there are many, many other sectors in the world that use data to figure out insurance pricing. Vitality is a classic one that many people that know in the health industry use. But money helps a lot.
That's brilliant. Is that okay, Warren?
It is, yeah. I mean, my own observation there, it's then a question of whose money, the contractor or the employer.
They put it up. Yeah, that's an open question, Warren.
Yeah. Thank you.
Our final question. So it's from Humayun. Is that the right pronunciation? I'm sorry if I got it wrong.
No, yes, Martin, that's right. Yeah, this is Humayun. Hi, Dave. So I'm from Highways, England.
Hello.
I'm head of planning. Hi. So I just have a quick question. I appreciate that you haven't been in the business for so long to see the outcome of your predictions yet. Yeah, it may be because the construction projects take very long. But when when you were testing your model based on the historic data, what is the accuracy of your model?
Yep. So we were able to predict 77% of all activities that had an impact on the project that were unforeseen by the project team.
Okay, that's cool. It's very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
All right, thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you soon.
Thank you both.